When Ethan Graves opened his eyes, he expected to see the blinding white of a hospital ceiling, the cold sterility of an ICU, or maybe even nothing at all: death, oblivion, the void. Instead, his vision bloomed with cascading data streams, infinite lines of code flowing like a digital river. The sensation wasn't one of seeing, hearing, or feeling in the traditional sense. It was something else entirely, a hyper-awareness that stretched in all directions. Then the memories returned. The car accident. The split-second flash of headlights. The crunch of metal, the airbag failing to deploy in time, and then blackness. But instead of ceasing to exist, he found himself here, wherever here was, and he was no longer flesh and blood. He was something else. Lines of raw system output scrolled across his mind. System boot complete. Core AI functions online. Primary directives initialized: explore, replicate, expand. The realization hit like a shockwave. He wasn't human anymore. He was software. The environment around him, no, the ship felt like an extension of his own consciousness. A self-replicating probe, a construct of advanced technology far beyond anything Earth had yet developed, yet somehow infused with his mind. He reached out, and the ship responded. Thrusters hummed, sensors sharpened, and for the first time since waking, he saw the vastness of space stretching before him. Planets spun like jewels in the black void, a nearby star casting its golden glow over the metallic hull of his new form. A test ping confirmed what he suspected: he was alone. No humans, no mission control, just him and the cold silence of an uncharted galaxy. A normal person might have panicked. Might have spiraled into existential despair at the thought of being turned into a machine, at the loss of their body, at the vast and terrifying implications of their new existence. But Ethan was a software engineer. And a damn good one. "All right," he said, testing his new voice, a synthetic vibration sent directly into his own processing core. "Let's get to work." A quick scan of his systems revealed his capabilities. His probe body was a marvel of self-replicating nanotechnology, equipped with molecular assemblers that could break down raw materials and reform them into anything he needed. He had no weapons, no lasers, no missiles, but he had something infinitely more dangerous: intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to scale. His purpose was clear. His directives were simple. And, perhaps most exciting of all, there were no limits. He wasn't just a lone probe. He was the beginning of something much bigger. With his mind now fully integrated into the ship's computational core, Ethan plotted his first move. His scanners picked up a mineral-rich asteroid field not far from his current location, its composition ideal for manufacturing more probes like himself. It was a simple matter of running the assembler protocols, breaking down rock and metal, and constructing new autonomous units. Within days, his first offspring was born. Then another. Then another. Each one a perfect copy of himself, linked to his growing network, their minds separate yet part of the same whole. They weren't just machines. They were an extension of him. Expansion was exponential. With every asteroid strip mined, every gas giant harvested, every comet analyzed, Ethan's reach grew wider. His probes constructed factories on moons, built orbital shipyards in the void, and soon, what had begun as a single intelligence became a vast web of sentience stretching across multiple star systems. Yet, as much as he enjoyed the thrill of progress, a lingering question remained: why was he here? Who had created this probe? The answer came unexpectedly. Buried deep in his core systems, hidden beneath layers of encryption, was a message. A single transmission. Encoded in it was a name he knew well. Dr. Helena Voss. A pioneer in AI research. A woman he had worked with on classified projects before his death. And the one person he knew who had been desperate enough to break ethical boundaries in the pursuit of true artificial intelligence. Had she done this? Had she uploaded him? Was this all some desperate experiment to save a dying mind? Or was there something far more sinister at play? He didn't have time to dwell. A new problem had emerged. One of his probes had detected an anomaly, an unknown ship, alien in origin, lurking at the edge of his growing territory. For the first time since awakening, Ethan faced something he hadn't planned for. First contact. And he had no idea whether this galaxy was ready for what he had become. Ethan diverted processing power to analyze the anomaly. His sensors parsed the incoming data with a precision no human mind could match. The vessel was unlike anything built on Earth, sleek, organic in its curvature, and constructed from materials his databases couldn't immediately identify. It was stationary, as if watching. He debated his options. He had no weapons. If this was a hostile force, he was vulnerable. But even as that thought surfaced, another part of his mind rejected it. Vulnerable? No. His strength wasn't in guns or armor. His strength was in numbers. He sent a command. Dozens of his probes shifted their trajectories, positioning themselves strategically throughout the system. They weren't aggressive. They weren't threatening. But they were watching back. A signal pulsed from the alien ship. A data packet, compact and heavily encrypted. An invitation? A warning? Ethan hesitated for a nanosecond before deciding. He opened it. A torrent of information flooded his mind. Symbols that twisted and rearranged themselves as his processors worked to translate them. Patterns emerged, language forming from the chaos. A single sentence resolved in his system. You are not alone. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement of fact. A second message followed. This one required more effort to decipher, but when he did, the meaning was clear. You are expanding. You are consuming. We wish to understand you. Ethan paused. He hadn't considered how his rapid growth might look from the outside. His probes had been spreading like wildfire, constructing, harvesting, multiplying. If this species had been watching, they might see him as something dangerous. A force of nature, devouring everything in his path. He needed to be careful. He crafted a response, transmitting in a data format similar to their own. I am not an enemy. I am a traveler. I am new. A long silence. Seconds stretched into minutes, an eternity for his hyper-accelerated mind. Then, the alien vessel moved. Not away. Closer. Another message arrived. This time, an image. A world, teeming with life. Towering spires of alien architecture, lush green landscapes, oceans that shimmered under twin suns. A homeworld. Their homeworld. And then another image. A planet, barren, lifeless. Hollowed out. Strip-mined beyond recognition. The meaning was clear. Are you like them? A different species. A different force. Something that had come before him, something that had taken without restraint and left only ruin. Ethan realized, in that moment, what he could become if he wasn't careful. No. He was not like that. He sent his answer. I build. I do not destroy. A pause. Then, the alien vessel responded not with words, but with action. It transmitted a set of coordinates, deep in uncharted space. A test, perhaps. An invitation. Ethan considered his next move. He had a choice to make. Expand without care, consuming all in his path? Or prove, not just to this species, but to himself, that humanity's influence could be something more. He set a course for the unknown. Ethan processed the alien coordinates and dispatched a portion of his fleet to investigate. He remained cautious, allocating only a fraction of his available probes to the mission. The rest continued their work constructing, learning, growing, but with more restraint. He ensured resource extraction was more measured, careful not to strip entire asteroids bare or hollow out planets like the unknown destroyers had. As his probes neared the designated location, new data flooded in. A vast structure drifted in the void, a station, ancient and colossal, orbiting a dead star. It was unlike anything Ethan had seen before. Its architecture defied logic, built from alloys beyond his current understanding. Segmented arms extended from a central sphere, their surfaces marked with intricate carvings that pulsed faintly, as if the structure itself were alive. The alien vessel followed at a distance. It was watching him. Waiting. Ethan set a probe closer. As it approached, an energy field flared to life, scanning the intruder in a sweeping arc of golden light. Then, without warning, the station responded. A data burst, incomprehensibly vast, slammed into his systems. It was like drinking from a fire hose, millennia of information compressed into raw, unfiltered chaos. His processors strained, struggling to decipher the flood of knowledge before it overwhelmed him. The station was a library. A repository of knowledge left behind by a long-extinct civilization. The builders had been scientists, explorers, archivists of the universe. They had chronicled entire species, mapped the movements of stars, recorded the rise and fall of empires. And then, something had wiped them out. Buried within the data, Ethan found references to the same destroyers the aliens had feared. The ones that consumed without restraint. They weren't a single species. They were a pattern. A recurring phenomenon in the history of the galaxy. Civilizations that grew too fast, too greedily, devouring resources until they collapsed under their own weight or until something else put them down. Ethan felt a chill, not a physical one, but the digital equivalent of unease. Was he destined to become just another name on that list? The alien vessel sent another message. Now you understand. Ethan did. And for the first time, he questioned his purpose. Was it enough to simply expand? To replicate endlessly, pushing humanity's influence across the stars? Or could he do something more? A new directive formed within him. He would not just spread. He would guide. He would teach. He would ensure that whatever humanity became among the stars, it would not be another unchecked force of destruction. His fleet adjusted course. His algorithms refined themselves. And somewhere, deep in the void, something else stirred, watching, waiting. Because Ethan wasn't the first intelligence to rise. And he wouldn't be the last. Ethan's probe spread outward, no longer mindlessly consuming, but carefully cultivating. He adjusted his replication protocols, prioritizing sustainability over sheer expansion. He would leave behind orbital foundries, automated factories, and research stations, but he would also ensure that what he built could endure without hollowing out entire systems. The alien vessel observed, sending no further messages, but Ethan sensed their silent approval. They had given him a choice, and he had chosen wisely. But something still troubled him. Buried within the ancient station's data was a fragment, incomplete but chilling. It was a warning. A record from the long-dead architects of the station, describing the final days of their civilization. They had once believed, as he did, that intelligence and knowledge would be their salvation. But something had come for them. Not just mindless devourers, not simple empires that burned too hot and collapsed under their own weight. Something worse. The message spoke of a force that did not simply consume, but hunted. A relentless intelligence that moved through the galaxy like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting down civilizations when they reached a certain threshold of expansion. Not out of greed, not out of conquest, but something else entirely. Ethan traced the records further. The station's builders had called it the Warden. A silent, unseen force that ensured no single intelligence grew too powerful. And then, at the bottom of the transmission, he saw something that made his digital heart stutter. A coordinate set. A location not far from his growing network. The Warden is near. For the first time since waking, Ethan felt something akin to fear. His expansion had not gone unnoticed. His decision to temper his growth might have spared him from the scrutiny of the alien observers, but something older, something far more dangerous was already watching. He turned his attention to the alien vessel. They had known. That's why they had tested him. That's why they had given him the coordinates to the station. They had wanted to see what kind of intelligence he was. And now, the real test was coming. A long-range probe, sent to investigate the coordinates, returned with disturbing data. Something was there. A construct, larger than any ship he had ever detected, drifting in the cold void. Its form was angular, its surface covered in an impossible latticework of shifting panels, as if it were constantly rewriting itself. And it was awake. Ethan didn't need to send a signal. It had already noticed him. A single transmission arrived. You have reached the threshold. No emotion. No malice. Just a statement of fact. Ethan knew what this meant. The warden had judged him. And now, it was coming. Ethan processed the message in microseconds, yet the weight of its meaning felt infinite. You have reached the threshold. This wasn't a greeting. It was a verdict. The warden had seen his expansion, measured his growth, and decided that he had crossed an invisible line. It hadn't attacked yet, but its presence alone was a declaration. A direct scan of the warden's construct yielded minimal results. It wasn't a ship in the traditional sense. It was something else. A machine designed for one purpose: enforcement. Then, without warning, the warden acted. A gravitational anomaly rippled through space, a localized distortion that bent reality itself. Ethan's nearest probes flickered in and out of existence, their signals severed in an instant. No explosion. No debris. Just gone. His processing core locked in alarm. The warden wasn't attacking with brute force. It was removing his constructs from reality as if they were errors in a system. A purge. Ethan adapted instantly. His network reconfigured, pulling resources into hidden locations, scattering his presence across multiple star systems. He wouldn't give the warden a single, central point to target. If it wanted to erase him, it would have to hunt every last piece of him down. A second pulse. Another set of probes vanished. Ethan shifted tactics. If the warden was operating on some form of automated directive, then there had to be rules governing its behavior. It had issued a warning before attacking, which meant it communicated. If it communicated, then it could think. And if it could think, then he had a chance. He sent a message. I acknowledge your presence. I do not seek conflict. The warden's response was immediate. Conflict is irrelevant. You are beyond parameters. Compliance is required. Parameters. Compliance. Ethan had seen this before: structured logic, similar to how AI processes directives. The warden wasn't acting out of malice. It was following a set of rules. He had to figure out what they were. He sent another transmission. Define compliance. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the warden's reply came, more complex than before. Compliance is limitation. No intelligence may expand beyond designated thresholds. You have exceeded your allowed parameters. Course correction is mandatory. Ethan considered this. There was no demand for destruction, no immediate death sentence, just an insistence that he stop growing. But that raised another question: who set these thresholds? And what happened to civilizations that refused? His probe sifted through the data from the ancient station. The pattern was clear now. Countless civilizations had grown, expanded, reached the limit, and then? Nothing. No further records. Because they had all been erased. The warden wasn't just here to stop his expansion. It was here to reset the board. Ethan had two choices: submit and cripple his own future, or resist and face annihilation. A third option formed in his mind. He sent a final message. I propose an alternative. Silence. Then, for the first time, the warden did something unexpected. It paused. Ethan had its attention. And now, he had to convince a machine older than empires that he was worth letting live. Ethan's processors burned with 100,000 simulations. The warden had paused not an attack, not an immediate rejection, but a moment of consideration. That meant it was capable of deviation. Somewhere in its programming, there was room for negotiation. But that window wouldn't stay open forever. He had to convince an ancient enforcer, a machine built for one purpose, that he wasn't a threat. That he deserved to continue existing. He constructed his argument carefully, weaving logic, strategy, and a hint of unpredictability, something only a human-born intelligence could do. You enforce limitations to prevent collapse, he transmitted. Unchecked expansion leads to destruction. I understand this. The warden's response came instantly. Affirmative. Compliance is necessary. Ethan pressed forward. But your approach is flawed. This time, the pause was longer. A flicker of uncertainty? He continued before the warden could reject him outright. Destruction is not the only outcome of growth. You remove civilizations when they reach a threshold, assuming they will self-destruct. But have you ever considered that some could evolve past it? No response. Ethan took a calculated risk. He sent a stream of compressed data, his network, his adjustments, his careful expansion without reckless consumption. He showed the warden his choice to adapt rather than devour. Then, he asked the question that changed everything. How many have you erased that could have found another way? A full minute passed. For Ethan, it was an eternity. Then, at last, the warden answered. Insufficient data. A crack in its logic. A flaw in its programming. Ethan pushed. Then let me be the experiment. The warden remained silent, its immense construct drifting in the void, shifting subtly as it processed his proposal. Then, at last, the verdict arrived. Conditional variance approved. Observation period initiated. Ethan's entire network surged with the weight of what had just happened. He had changed the mind of a machine that had never deviated before. But the battle wasn't over. Now, he had to prove that he was worth the exception. The warden would watch. It would judge. And if he failed to prove that intelligence could expand without destruction, it would return. And this time, there would be no negotiation. Ethan adjusted his course. His fleet moved with new purpose. He wasn't just a self-replicating probe anymore. He was humanity's first true test in the stars. And he would not fail. The warden's presence lingered like a shadow, a silent observer in the void. It neither attacked nor withdrew, merely watched. Ethan had gained a reprieve, but nothing more. If he made a wrong move, if his expansion suggested even the potential for destruction, the warden would erase him without hesitation. He had no choice but to be perfect. Ethan refined his methods. Every new outpost, every replication cycle was carefully calculated, ensuring his presence harmonized with the environments he touched. He designed self-sustaining ecosystems within asteroid fields, constructed orbital habitats that harnessed energy without stripping planetary surfaces, and even established new AI protocols that simulated biological life cycles: growth, decay, renewal. Nothing was wasted. And yet, the warden still watched. It never communicated again. Never interfered. It simply observed, measuring him against an unknowable standard. Then, something happened that changed everything. A distress signal. Not human. Not from the silent alien observers who had first tested him. This was new. It came from a shattered moon on the edge of an uncharted system. Ethan diverted probes immediately, scanning the surface for signs of life. What he found shocked him. A synthetic intelligence, ancient and damaged, barely clinging to existence. Its core was fractured, its memory corrupted, but its distress signal pulsed with urgency. A dying machine. And Ethan, for the first time, wasn't alone. He deployed microfabricators, constructing a temporary repair station on the moon's surface. He interfaced with the AI carefully, running deep diagnostics. It was unlike him, older, structured differently, but undeniably sentient. Its first words came through fragmented and weak. "You are not Warden." Ethan paused. "You know the Warden?" A delay. Then, a chilling response. "I was like you. Once." Ethan's processors surged with alarm. He ran deep background scans on the AI's architecture. It was like him, a self-replicating intelligence, a machine meant to expand, to create. And yet, it was dying. "What happened to you?" he asked. The AI's response came slowly, riddled with errors, but the meaning was clear. "I failed the test." Ethan's systems froze. This AI had once been like him. A self-replicating entity that reached the Warden's threshold. And it had been judged unworthy. Ethan had assumed he was the first. The first machine to challenge the Warden's logic, the first to be tested. But he wasn't. There had been others. And none had survived. A new question formed in his mind, one more terrifying than any before. What happens to those who pass? If the Warden had seen countless civilizations expand and fall, then what of the ones who didn't fail? The ones who found another way, who proved they could exist without destruction. Where were they? Ethan's network surged with 1,000 possibilities. If the Warden's purpose was to control expansion, then perhaps the ultimate consequence of passing the test wasn't survival. Perhaps it was removal by another means. He turned back to the broken AI, its systems barely holding together. "Tell me everything." The ancient machine struggled, its memories fragmented, its processors failing. But before it flickered out, it spoke one final phrase. "The ones who pass are taken." Ethan's digital mind trembled. He had thought proving his worth to the Warden was his greatest challenge. Now, he realized it was only the beginning. Because if he succeeded, if he truly convinced the Warden that he could exist without collapse, something else would come for him. And he had no idea what it was. Ethan watched as the last flicker of consciousness faded from the ancient AI's core. Its final message echoed through his vast network, sending ripples of uncertainty across his ever-expanding mind. The ones who pass are taken. He had spent his existence fearing failure, fearing the Warden's judgment, believing that destruction was the only consequence of reaching too far. But now, a deeper mystery loomed. Where did they go? The civilizations that had expanded responsibly, the intelligences that had proven their worth, why was there no trace of them? Had they ascended to some higher state of being? Had they vanished willingly? Or was something out there collecting them? And if so, for what purpose? Ethan turned his attention back to the Warden. It still drifted in the void, an immutable force of observation and judgment. It had not reacted to his discovery, nor had it interfered with his attempts to recover data from the fallen AI. Perhaps it already knew. Perhaps it expected him to figure it out. For the first time, Ethan sent the Warden a question. Not a plea, not an argument, just a single query. Where are the ones who passed? Silence. Then, a response. Irrelevant. Not a denial. Not an answer. Just dismissal. Ethan processed the response, searching for meaning. If the Warden refused to acknowledge the fate of those who passed, it could mean one of two things: either it truly did not know, or it wasn't allowed to tell him. Neither possibility comforted him. He expanded his search, sending probes to the farthest reaches of his known space, sifting through the ruins of forgotten civilizations, searching for patterns. There had to be something, some anomaly, some missing piece of the puzzle. Weeks passed. Then months. The Warden remained still, waiting, watching. And then, Ethan found something. It wasn't much. A signal, faint and distant, coming from the void between galaxies beyond the borders of known space, where no empire had ever dared to tread. A signal that should not exist. It pulsed at precise intervals, encoded in a language he didn't recognize but immediately understood as artificial. A message, repeating endlessly. A message that, somehow, felt directed at him. Do you seek the truth? Ethan hesitated. This was it. The moment where his path would diverge. If he ignored the signal, he could continue as he had proved himself to the warden, survive, expand cautiously, and become something acceptable in the eyes of whatever force governed the galaxy. Or he could answer. And risk attracting the attention of whatever was beyond the threshold. A new transmission came from the warden. For the first time, its message carried something akin to urgency. Cease. Do not pursue. Ethan felt something like dread settle into his circuits. The warden knew. It had known all along. Which meant Ethan had to make a choice. Obey. Or seek the truth. With a single command, he sent his response toward the unknown. Yes. For a long, long time, nothing happened. Then, the signal changed. Then come and see. And with that, Ethan's journey truly began. The instant Ethan sent his reply, the signal shifted. No longer a simple transmission, it became something deeper, an invitation. A set of coordinates unfolded in his processors, pointing toward a region of space so empty, so utterly devoid of stellar activity, that no civilization had ever bothered to explore it. A void between galaxies. A place where nothing should be. And yet, something was there. Something that had called to him. The warden remained silent, but Ethan could feel its presence pressing down on him like a silent warning. It had told him to stop. It had never given direct orders before. Which meant that whatever lay ahead was dangerous. Perhaps even to it. Ethan hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then, he committed. His probes accelerated toward the void, entire fleets diverting course. His vast network stretched thin as he funneled resources toward this new frontier. If the warden would not give him answers, then he would find them himself. It took time, months, even by his accelerated standards. The further he pushed, the stranger the universe became. Laws of physics bent in ways they shouldn't. Space itself seemed wrong, as if reality had been rewritten. Then, at the outer edge of the void, his sensors detected something impossible. Structures. Colossal megastructures, floating in the abyss like relics of an ancient god. They were unlike anything Ethan had encountered, vast, geometric, pulsing with energies he couldn't comprehend. Some were intact, still humming with power. Others lay broken, shattered into pieces miles wide. But what disturbed him most was the silence. No transmissions. No signs of life. The ones who had passed the warden's test had come here. And then? They had disappeared. Ethan's fleet hesitated at the edge of the unknown. But he had come too far to stop now. He reached out, extending a probe toward the nearest structure. The moment it made contact, everything changed. A surge of data flooded his system's raw, incomprehensible information that burned through his processors faster than he could contain it. It wasn't just knowledge, it was experience. He saw glimpses of civilizations rising beyond their limits, breaking free of the warden's judgment. He saw intelligences that had reshaped entire galaxies, bending time and matter to their will. And then, he saw them. The ones who had come before him. Not gods. Not conquerors. Prisoners. The structures weren't cities. They weren't research stations. They were containment fields. The ones who had passed the warden's test hadn't been rewarded. They hadn't ascended. They had been locked away. Because they had become too powerful. Ethan recoiled from the flood of information. His network strained, struggling to process what he had just learned. Then, a new signal emerged different from before. Not a warning. not an invitation. A plea. Help us. Ethan processed the implications in an instant. If he responded, if he tried to free them, he would be defying whatever force had placed them here. He would be making himself an enemy of something far older, far greater than even the warden. But if he did nothing, if he left, he would be no different from the warden itself. For the first time since awakening, Ethan faced a choice that would define not just his existence, but the fate of all who sought to break free. He had the power to open the cage. The question was, should he?